Good afternoon. On behalf of the committee, I'd like to welcome Minister Zappone, who is accompanied by Ms Emer Fisher, Assistant Secretary to the Department, Mr Dennis O'Sullivan, Principal Officer, Mr Albert O'Donoghue, Principal Officer of the Department of Children and Youth Affairs, also Interim CEO of TUSLA, Mr Pat Smith, Director of Transformation and Policy, Mr Cormac Quinlan, and Assistant Principal Officer in the Department of Children and Youth Affairs, Mr Michael Keenan. You're all very welcome. Welcome members and also viewers who may be watching the proceedings on Oireachtas TV to the public session of the Joint Oireachtas Committee on Children and Youth Affairs. Members are reminded of the long-standing parliamentary practice to the effect that members should not comment on, criticise nor make charges against a person outside the House or any official by name or in a way such to make him, her or it identifiable. May I please remind members to switch off your mobile phones as they will interfere with the recording systems. I wish to advise the Minister that any submissions or opening statements you make to the committee will be published on the committee website after this meeting. After your presentation, there will be questions for the members of the committee, as is normal. And then I would like to call on Minister Zappone to make your opening statement, please.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, and deputies and senators. It's great to be here. Thank you for the invitation to join you. To discuss Brexit with you and how it will impact on the workings of my department and TUSLA. At the outset, I'd just like to mention that really the number of Brexit-related matters that lie within the areas of responsibility of my department or TUSLA to address in their entirety are actually quite small. Of course, there is a multitude on issues raised by the Brexit process which may impact across all of government on its services and on the citizens and the businesses of this state. But I'd like to use our time today to focus on issues of specific interest to the committee, and in particular, there are a small number of areas, though, in which, in conjunction with other departmental colleagues, my officials are seeking to mitigate our potential exposure post the UK leaving the European Union. But if I may, just before getting to those issues, I want to highlight some of the issues that have consistently been raised by young people as matters of concern to them, because we thought that was really important. I did, in terms of the department, to go to them and to hear from them. And those issues have remained remarkably consistent since the intention of the UK to leave the EU was confirmed. And from my own Brexit-related consultations then with young people, whether it was in Croke Park or Dolnan and Og, consultations on Brexit, or the Ombudsman for Children's consultations with young people on Brexit and other events. The themes that came out or that are coming from them really are pretty much the same, and they may be summarized as follows. That firstly, Brexit will impact profoundly on the island of Ireland, and the current generation of young people will be those who will have to live with the decisions made during the negotiations. Secondly, a hard border and regression to the violence of the past is to be avoided at all costs. The Good Friday Agreement is to be protected. This is what the young people are saying. Brexit must not be utilized to drive a deeper societal division. Brexit must not limit opportunity for those on the island of Ireland. And work and travel and study opportunities for all must be maintained. The North-South cooperation, and there's a lot of it, in healthcare, education, policing, safety, and child protection must remain, and access to services must be guaranteed. While all of these issues are of concern to the young people on this island, most of them fall to other government departments and agencies to address, but they have had that information as they've worked on that. We have fed that in. Access to education, for example, obviously is a matter for colleagues in the Department of Education and Skills. The Good Friday Agreement falls within the remit of the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. That department, as I know you are aware, is leading on much of our Brexit response, including in areas such as the common travel area, which is really important here, especially for the young people, on which they work closely with the Department of Justice, Equality, and a number of other departments. Our response to Brexit, of course, then is a whole of government exercise. But moving to my own department, of course, we work with part of the structures that were established by both the departments of Taoiseach and the Foreign Affairs and Trade to deal with Brexit-related matters. And in this regard, officials have consistently contributed to the interdepartmental group on EU and Brexit, the Brexit Coordinators Group, and the Interdepartmental North-South Coordinators Group. And this is in addition to representation on the groups dealing with no-deal Brexit planning at Secretary General and Assistant Secretary General level, who meet on a weekly basis. So what are the issues then, strictly speaking, for my department? In light of that ongoing analysis, there's been really 3 issues that have been identified that would have potential to impact to a greater or lesser degree on my department, and also our work with TUSLA. So first of all, Brussels II. The Council Regulations EC number 2201/2003, Brussels II, governs jurisdiction and recognition of judgments in matrimonial matters and matters of parental responsibility. And while the majority of this regulation is applicable to private law matters, and therefore its related domestic issues would fall, in this case, to the Department of Justice and Equality for consideration, the regulation does provide the framework by which children in the care of a member state may be transferred to the jurisdiction of another member state. The regulation also sets out the issues for consideration in any proposed transfer of child care proceedings from one member state to another, as well as providing a mechanism by which reports on children and families may be sought by relevant courts from the member states. And where this regulation would have most resonance then is in the transfer of young people to the UK for secure care or advanced therapeutic mental health services. At any point in time, there are roughly 10 young Irish citizens being cared for in the out-of-state provision, and in a similar fashion, children from Northern Ireland placed in settings in predominantly the border counties avail of the regulation to govern such placements. But legislation is not required in the event of Brussels IIa not being carried forward by the UK post-Brexit. While it would be prudent to draw up an agreement or a bilateral to restate the agreed procedures that we have for out-of-state placements, there would be no legal impediment to such placements, even without Brussels II. Moreover, the Protection of Children or the Hague Convention Act of 2000 would facilitate placements similar to that operating under Brussels IIa. Consideration is being given, though, to the need for putting in place then new protocols for consistency of practice and effective communication. So that's the first issue that we're dealing with. The second would be recognition of qualifications. In tandem with other sectors, for example, health, the recognition of professional qualifications into the future poses a particular challenge. Recognition of qualifications is a matter that's being led, obviously, by the colleagues in the Department of Education and Skills. But the greatest source of impact for areas covered by my department would be in relation to those qualifications relevant to social work, given the ongoing drive for the recruitment of social workers by TUSLA. However, the risk associated with any divergence in qualifications is considered currently to be very low. A process already exists within my department for recognition of early years qualifications from third countries, and this has been discussed with the UK representatives at the British Irish Council Early Years Working Group. And that group will continue to provide an opportunity to exchange views on these matters. My department has been liaising with the Department of Education on this matter, and DES has not raised any concerns regarding recognition of qualifications post-Brexit, and is well equipped, I think, to deal with future recognition. The third area, and actually it was also something that the young people raised in some of the earlier sessions, is the peace funding. Youth services are included under the current Peace 4 program, which means that Brexit will impact in the context of peace funding. We welcome the UK commitments to the current Peace program and to a future Peace Plus program, and the Commission proposals to ensure continuity of these vital funds. I and my department will continue to advocate for the inclusion of the youth streams in a future program, and any loss in this area would be a lost opportunity in terms of funding for future youth services, both sides of the border. While confident that the current peace program will be maintained, any funding impacts on youth services as a result of Brexit will be kept under review through 2019. I am conscious that the potential for Brexit, depending on the exit mechanism chosen by the UK government, to have varying degrees of impact on the young people of this state. But my officials and I are committed to working closely with colleagues at all levels of government to ensure that everything possible can be done to mitigate any potential negative consequences of the UK's decision to leave the EU in light of Brexit. So that concludes my opening remarks. But I'm delighted to have the views of the committee on this important topic, and I have a great group of officials here to also assist us with that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Minister, for your opening statement. Just two quick questions before I allow Deputy Rabbitte come in. Given the imminent departure of the UK, or the presumed imminent departure of the UK from the Union, with or without a deal, or perhaps with an extension, in terms of recognition of qualifications, and I fully appreciate this is not entirely with your department, but in terms of the state's response, I mean, what steps can we take to ensure sort of mutual recognition, and that the UK, or have they given any indication to the Irish government as to any proposed divergence from the standards associated with educational qualifications? And do you envisage that it will impact upon our ability to recruit social workers, social care workers in particular, because there are clearly two issues, having discussed it last week, yes, Minister, in this committee. That would be very important. And the second one is, could you perhaps go into a little bit more detail in regard to peace funding and how it affects your department, please? Just those two questions, and then Deputy Rabbitte will step in.
Okay, thank you. Yes, in relation to your first question, Chair, thank you. That's a good one. You know, certainly in a no-deal context, the Department of Education and Skills, working with, of course, the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade and other departments, is really leading work to ensure, insofar as possible, that the provisions of arrangements with the UK, that we will be able to have that mutual recognition of qualifications. And some of that, I think it will be referenced, or, in relation to the bill that we will be publishing, but anything that's not required for a legislative basis, my understanding is that in this case, as with other issues, that we wish to ensure as much as opportunity as possible in this case for our young people, that there could be appropriate bilateral agreements effectively between the jurisdictions. So, and your second part to that question has to do with then, in relation to qualifications, recognition, and recruitment of social workers, which I referenced as well. And I know that you heard here last week or the week before, as you say, in terms of the discussion of that, that we are dealing with a shortage of social workers. There's a global shortage of social workers. At the same time, the TUSA is well aware of that and has to, accept that and still move forward in terms of its finding new solutions to those recruitment challenges. I think that it's important to say, too, that the recognition of qualification only arises in the case, obviously, of newly qualified workers. I don't know if my colleague, Mr. Quinlan, wants to say anything in relation to that last piece.
Well, specifically just in relation to the current process. So there is a recognition process already in place through CORU, obviously, for any, both members of any institution in Europe, but also outside of Europe. So there is already a recognition process in place that will look at individual applications for recognition and approve those generally. And that's why I think there's already mechanisms in place to ensure that that shouldn't be a problem, particularly for social work.
Just before perhaps you move on to the other question, piece, I suppose the fact of the reality of the situation is that any divergence from existing arrangements by the UK will result in, I would assume, the withdrawal of any arrangement between the European Union and the UK, which would result in a very significant reduction in the availability of individuals who might have British qualifications So I'm just wondering, to the best of your knowledge, have there been a discussion? And are the UK, have they said in any way, shape or form that they are planning to depart from existing arrangements? Because to me, and as a layperson in that specific field of qualification recognition, is there something that they could or may do which will result in that arrangement being broken, or does it fall with Brexit? To the best of my knowledge, it doesn't, but you might just clarify that, please.
But I'm going to ask Eamon Fisher to just respond to that more directly.
Thanks, Chairman. I suppose it goes to the nub issue of how a social worker is recognised here. It's not necessarily, my understanding is that it's not necessarily on the basis of the qualification, but course content.
Right.
And if course content is recognised, then that will continue. So we have a situation where currently qualified people will continue, newly qualified people, depending on course content, which is considered by CORU, then that will remain part of the registration. So as long as there is a course content that is suitable and acceptable to CORU, that will happen. So it goes into the broader question then, Chairman, in relation to how the Department of Education is considering the far broader issue of qualifications. I think, does that answer you?
It does, and I suppose, sorry to Deputy Rabbitte, it does raise another question though, because there have been issues in terms of the Department recognising qualifications from other jurisdictions, and it tends to take a long time. In my personal experience with getting the Department to recognise or to even make a decision on recognition. So my concern is that if the UK fail to adequately address this matter in their negotiations with the Union, or indeed the Union doesn't adequately address them with the UK, that if there is a divergence in the future, that the delay that might occur when the Department goes to, or when the European Union looks to those criteria in which the curriculum is changed for qualifying social workers, or any other profession for that matter, that Ireland may suffer as a result. And it's, we don't have a large enough population, it appears, to meet with our requirement for social workers, or rather we simply don't have enough of them at present, and recruitment is insufficient to cater for the demand that's there. So I just wanted to flag that now, and I think perhaps if the Minister, in the next conversation that you have in relation to this matter with the Minister of Education, that you might raise it, because I think it flows from our meeting last week in relation to social workers.
I do appreciate that.
So, just Mr. Quinn.
Just maybe to restate the point, I suppose, under the Health and Social Care Act, there's a number of approved courses, I suppose, that are set out for social work. So anyone outside of that can apply through CORU for a recognition process. So there's no automatic approval of courses from the UK as such. You apply based on your course content and relevant work experience you have. The recognition process considers that and approves you then as meeting the standards set out for the standards of proficiency as set out by the Act. So there shouldn't be any blockage to anybody, even in a no-deal Brexit, being able to apply for a recognition process through CORU and have their qualification recognised here, for social work in particular.
And I will bring that also to the attention of my colleague. May I just in addressing your second question about the peace funding in terms of our current 2019, we have 2.1 million in our own vote for the peace funding, but it is a program funded by 85% the EU and 7.5% by Ireland and 7.5% by Northern Ireland. Our colleagues, however, in deeper, and this I think is important to say, on the Peace 4 program, have advised us that the Commission has guaranteed to continue funding of the same, the program, including the UK government element, should the UK government renege on its previous commitment to fund its portion of the current program, which is in place until 2021. This is not to say that they're anywhere near considering that, but should that be the case, this is the contingency. And the draft withdrawal agreement and the Commission's proposal for regulation in the event of a disorderly Brexit both provide for the legal basis for the peace and the Interreg programs to continue once the UK leaves
Thank you
the EU.
for that clarification, Minister. I now invite Deputy Rabbitte to question the Minister and her officials.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Minister and officials, for coming before us today. I suppose, Minister, I have about three different questions, and I'm glad you have referenced the various events that took place in Croke Park. I attended that particular day,
right.
and I also, 12 months later, I went to Newry,
Yes.
and I attended the one
With
in
the
Newry as
Ombudsman.
well. And exactly as you were saying, were a lot of the issues that the children have actually articulated, and they articulated them incredibly well. And I felt that they were ahead of the curve myself, whereas adults mightn't have been taking it as seriously. They were taking it very, very seriously, and their voice was well heard. So I suppose from that, Minister, what I'm asking you is that while your department, possibly, as you say yourself in your opening statement, might have a small role to play in all of this, but the departments that you feed into have a larger role. And I think about the Department of Justice when I'm talking about this. And I'm thinking about in relation to safeguarding the child protection issues that are all around that. Like, I'm wondering, at the moment we have a good working relationship with the PSNI, and we have a good working relationship with the police of the UK, and we have also a very good working relationship with the sharing of information across all the borders. And I'm talking in the context of a no-deal Brexit, because that is the vacuum we're talking in at the moment. So, in the event of a no-deal Brexit, that sharing of information, Minister, where then, what's your understanding as to where we're going to share information, or how are we going to have that child protection issue covered off? It's a big concern for me, because I think we know that the department out in the Phoenix Park on Garda Síochána, that we have a wing out there that particularly works in relation to child protection issues. And when we talk about child protection, we're talking about child trafficking as well as everything else in it. So where is it going to be? Because now we're talking in the context of a third country as to what is the remit around the third country. And I suppose, Minister, that is just as really what I'm looking at there. But I'm just wondering, your department and your officials, like, how many meetings have you had in the last 12 months with the Minister for Health, the Minister for Mental Health, Education and Justice? Because I'm sure they have to be feeding back to your department to tell you in relation to care orders that we might be having to send children to the UK for various forms of support or treatment, as to how that will continue. Like, I know that in your statement there you said consideration is being given to the need for putting in place new protocols for consistency of practice and effective communications. Like, consideration, like, what is the basis of not making it practice, or where are we at with the considerations, or the departments feeding into that? They're my two questions, and thank you.
Okay,
Minister.
well, I answered. Okay, thank you. I will start. I think those are excellent questions, and as you say, on the basis really of a lot of the concerns expressed already about from the young people themselves. In terms of the child protection issues and the sharing of information, especially between the PSNI and, let's say, on Garda Síochána, those are really critical issues. Some of that, again, is, in fact, we even discussed that today in Cabinet, and some of that, because some of that is covered in reference to the some of the legislative change that would be required. At the same time, we are fully intending that that kind of information sharing continues, both in the context of the practices and the protocols that have developed, as well as if there are any legislative changes that require. So that is being dealt with very explicitly. The sharing in the context certainly of the legislative framework, the sharing of the information continues also in terms of, from the perspective of the child's best interest, of course, in the public interest, and on a legal basis under the Children First and Withholding of Information Act. So those are, that's just to begin to answer that question. Your second question, in terms of there have been, we have had, and I have fed into regular conversations at Cabinet in relation to those issues in terms of the other ministers, and in complementing that, and maybe more in terms of the detail that you're referring to now, all of the Secretary Generals meet on a regular basis, being fed over the last number, probably a year or so, is that right? Or
Last 6 months.
whatever, last 6 months, exactly, in order to tease out some of the detail of some of these other issues. Do you want to refer to that?
I can. If you want, Deputy.
Yeah,
Thank you.
please.
Thanks, Chairman. Yes, we've certainly have had contact on a bilateral basis, but also, I suppose, all of this is coordinated, Deputy, by the Department of the Taoiseach through our weekly meetings of Secretaries General, the weekly meetings of the Assistant Secretaries, the coordinators meeting also. So these issues are raised there. But apart from that, we have raised issues ourselves in relation to our identification of the issues which all departments were required to do some time ago. And these were the key issues for our department that you've raised there. So in relation to the child protection and sharing of information, the legal advice that we received was that it was quite strong in relation to the child's best interest would always trump any other situations in relation to, if it's in the child's best interest to share the information, you share the information. Falling back from that, then you have the public interest, which would be a safety net also. But finally, there'd be the legal basis for the sharing of information, which is set out in the Children First Act and the withholding of information. The question is, if all of that still doesn't provide the certainty, which we would say it does, but if still there's something behind that, then there would be a need for a protocol. But there's no legislation required as of this time. There's no requirement. It's simply if, particularly in the case of secure care, if we look at secure care, secure care information can be shared on those bases also, those 3 bases. But in the light of the uncertainty as to how Britain is going to leave at the moment, it's impossible to put those agreements in place at the moment. But and the understanding from the Department of Justice is that the Hague Convention steps in then, so the Hague Convention Act 2000 steps in relation to the placing of children in other jurisdictions from one member state to another member state. So that would facilitate the placing of children in another member state. If Britain moves, the Hague Convention steps in then. Behind that, we are also considering, for a belt and braces situation, a protocol. It won't be required, but at the same time, just in Agla na Hagla, we will look at that as well.
Through the Chair, can I have a supplementary question, if you don't mind?
Yes,
and I suppose, Emer, it's directed at yourself, because, yes, so we talk about the belts and braces, and we're talking about secure care, but if we could just step it back a little bit further again, in relation to a child protection issue where a child would be, say, abducted in Ireland and brought to the UK or brought to Northern Ireland, or vice versa, a child was abducted in the UK and brought into Northern Ireland, what measures and protocols would be in place there and then?
There'd be 2 answers to that, I think, Deputy. Number 1, the Hague Convention would apply, but also a criminal offence information would always be, a criminal offence, the protection of children in the context of criminal offences, sharing of information would always be done. In the case of a prevention of crime, if there was even a suggestion that a child might be abducted, even before the child is actually abducted, for the prevention of crime there will be sharing of information. If the child is actually abducted, the police would share information, but the Hague Convention would also be there as a safety net.
All right.
Deputy Mitchell, please.
Thanks, Minister, for coming in today. I just have a question in regards foster care placements. Is there any expected impact on these services? Because I note in the general scheme of the bill, there is a mention of an amendment to ensure that payments coming from the British authorities won't be taxed here in Ireland. And so I'm guessing from that relates to cross-border fostering. So I just want to ask how many placements would we have on a cross-border fostering? And do you think that, regardless of any deal, is this going to have an impact on these children that are in foster care?
Okay, thank you, Deputy. I mean, I think one of what I hear you saying really has to do with the taxation matter, but
yeah.
just in relation to the other aspects.
So just in terms of children in foster care presently, there's 9 children currently placed in the UK in a foster care arrangement, but we would still hold responsibility for those placements, so we still govern those placements in the terms of our statutory responsibility. So these happen sometimes where foster parents might relocate to the UK, so the children are still under our care. We still meet our regulatory requirements in respect of them, and we continue to pay those placements in that context.
Okay. Have any foster, so it's mainly 9 just in the UK, there's no children fostered up to the north, right? Is there any children?
Well, that's broadly in the UK, I suppose.
So where I'm asking is of the impact of Brexit, because we're hearing so much, like, and I know that none of us have the answers to it, but we're hearing about insurance So when we talk about foster care, how will that impact? Will that still be in place? You know, their insurance, travel, you know, coming back and forward, coming across the border, access, sibling access.
Yeah,
I'm just
so-
wondering, where are we on that?
So all of the regular requirements, as we would in any placement, we would still meet those. In relation to contracts, then we would have,
Yeah.
if it's with a private provider, that would be covered under any of our contracts, I suppose, individually in relation to any of those individual placements. So in relation to matters concerning insurance or payments, all that, we would cover that in relation to the normal procedures regarding any contract. And the contract could include then provisions for information sharing as well in that context if it needed to do so in that space. So we would still govern and support all of those placements and meet our requirements in relation to that child's placement in that
Okay,
context.
so it's happening.
It's
as
business
is.
as usual, I would say, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Deputy.
Thank you, Deputy. Senator Freeman, please.
Hello, Minister. Good to see you again here, and thank you, all of you, for giving us this opportunity to be able to voice any concerns that we have. I was sort of preempted, my question was sort of somewhat preempted by Deputy Rabbitte, because obviously my biggest concern is about out-of-state placements for our children. We all know how difficult it is anyway to make these out-of-state placements. Sometimes it can take months and even years, but my concern is two things. You know what you say here in your opening statement, that there would be no legal impediment. First of all, I'd like to know what impediments could there be, regardless legal or not. The second thing is, why don't we know how Britain is going to respond if they're going to leave? Why do we not know? Are they definitely going to still honour any out-of-state placements? I do know that the Hague Convention will kick in if there are issues, but have we had conversations with Britain about out-of-state placements?
Yeah. Yes, okay, exactly, great, thank you. Yes, you know, I think the, you know, and thank you for your question, and again, if other colleagues want to chip in, that, you know, the Hague Convention, I think, and it is, as you've said just there, and we've been saying, you know, would facilitate placements similar to that operation that's currently under Brussels too. So in terms of as being members, so consideration is being given to the need for putting in place new protocols for consistency of practice and effective communication. So those discussions are going on at present, even with, I suppose, the convention operative in the background.
With England, are you saying? Yeah. Sorry.
Record Eamon wants to add to that.
Our understanding, I have no idea because I can't predict what the UK will do in relation to this, but our understanding is very clear that the Hague Convention Act will apply, so it's an act that will apply, and that there is no impediment of any sort in relation to the placing of children in other jurisdictions, in the UK jurisdiction, should they leave with the no-deal Brexit. So the situation is that we're quite confident in relation to the fact that the Hague Convention Act will continue to apply, but I have no way of knowing how Britain will behave.
You haven't had those conversations then?
I don't think they've had those conversations themselves.
I don't think anybody from our department.
But surely that's a conversation we should be having with where children are being placed at this moment in England.
My position and the position, I think, of the department under the Minister would be that our legal advice, which comes from the Attorney General's office, is very strong, and I suppose I would place store in relation to the legal position from the Attorney General's office as articulated by the Attorney General's office.
Thank you. Senator? Yeah. Anything further? Senator Warfield, please.
Thanks. And thanks to the Minister and Tusa and others for coming in. I don't think it should be lost on the conversation that you brought the voices of young people here, and that's to be welcomed.
The what, sorry?
That you brought the voices of young people here.
Okay, excuse me. I didn't hear you. Thank you.
That is a shift from the past and a shift from my experience in these buildings. Without wanting to go over covered ground, I just want to say that, you know, modernity beckons and changes all around, and in terms of your All-Ireland civil dialogue, young people in the North are increasingly looking to the progress that we've made here, be it marriage equality and be it a repeal of the 8th Amendment. Changes all around, and the challenge that we face is managing that change and managing it well. And I just want to say that in the event of a crash out, that your department must be ready and willing to, again, go back to the voices of young people and listen to their aspirations, because my sense is that the call for Irish unity is building as well, and we shouldn't be afraid of that conversation. That conversation should be inclusive. I have just a question about the ongoing strategies, in particular the LGBTI youth strategy. I have a bill that concerns one of the actions regarding conversion therapy. It's an early action. It's 2019 is the deadline. Not necessarily that specific action. Do you have a fear that the ongoing work of your department across the strategies is going to be impacted? And can we expect delays in the delivery of any of the actions, for example, in the LGBTI youth strategy?
Well, thank you for those questions. In relation to your first point, I think you're absolutely correct in terms of going back to the young people, and it's my memory in terms of those bigger events, and Deputy Rabbitte, you might have a comment, but and certainly ongoing conversations in terms of the reality of Brexit, that the young people voiced concerns about things that they effectively were saying cannot change. On our island, particularly, that they were speaking about, and that they don't have any memory of ways other than what they've experienced, and they're not willing to go back, and they want the adults to sort it out. And they've given us a lot of time and to sort it out, and we're still working on that. So I think you're absolutely right in terms of whatever the resolutions are, that it would be important to go back to them and to have them assist us maybe in finding maybe better solutions than we were able to do ourselves, but certainly to be able to continue to insist that they should have similar opportunities and access that they do now. In terms of your second question, and again, I don't know if anyone, Emer, wants to add to this, maybe initially I would say it really, ultimately it depends on what are the ways in which the change will happen. Whether we'll have an acceptance of the withdrawal agreement as is, long extension, no deal, crash out, all of that will impact differently our economic context. And one of the things that the government, again, is very aware of, and again, I've just come from an extended conversation about these issues in Cabinet, is that the economic impact of what it is that's about to happen, or that will, whenever it happens, anyhow, we're getting closer to that, it will be massive. And we have to figure out a way to ensure that not only are we able to find ways to build on the, I suppose, the economic positive changes that we have had in the country for a while, but so too, as you've indicated, the social changes too, and in order to ensure that we find the resources to continue to do that. And so that would be my primary concern. But I don't know. Can you absolutely guarantee that? I don't know that we can guarantee anything at the moment in terms of, certainly in terms of the resources that would be available for such work. Indeed, our EU membership is our greatest protection from the challenges that Brexit will bring, and not both with the in terms of whatever way the exit happens, that we will depend on and look for new ways in terms of our membership of Europe and economically, but also the implications of that socially too. Anybody else?
Thank you. Well done. Just, I'm conscious of time, but Deputy Rabbitte, please.
All right. Thank you again, Chair, for letting me come in. I think, Emer, this is a question directly at yourself. You're off the hook, Minister. You were saying in the last couple of months yourself and the various principal officers would have met with other departments. in relation to various ongoings, okay? And you would have identified key issues, of which one of them was the child protection issue. Is there other key issues that you had identified as well that aren't in the Minister's statement, or you'd like to share with us here?
Thanks, Chairman. Thanks, Deputy. No, I mean, the three key issues, we looked at the issue of child protection, obviously, and that was discounted as one that would be escalated up to the key issues level as such, because of the safety nets that were there. So the three issues remain those three key issues, which were the Brussels II, the qualifications, and the peace funding. So there are no other ones. We did a trawl twice of the whole department and of all the different units within the department in relation to being absolutely sure there was nothing lurking in relation to Brexit impact on the department or on children's services in Ireland, and there was absolutely nothing apart from the three ones which were escalated up to this level. We're confident in relation to the child protection. We've had discussions with our legal advisors on that, and so I don't think there's anything else that we could have done, to be perfectly honest, from the point of view. We attend the, as I said, the Secretaries General meeting and the Assistant Secretaries meeting, so we listen in to what's happening in other departments. Their weekly meetings, we get all those papers, and that informs our thinking as well. So from that point of view, we're fairly confident that all corners have been covered.
All right. Thank you, Chair. Thanks.
Well, thank you very much to the Minister and her officials. Just to say in conclusion, regardless of the result in terms of which path the United Kingdom take, the citizens of this state, whom we are responsible in this committee and in your department, will feel the effects for many, many years to come. And I think it is important that that is stated, but just to also restate something that you said, Minister, a few moments ago, which I think is critical, and it is supported by all members of the Dáil and Seanad in terms of a direction in which this state has taken the negotiations and our approach to Brexit, which I think should speak volumes, perhaps when the children of today look back in the future as to what the government or what the Oireachtas was doing when Brexit occurred. And that is that the strength that we have found in one another in terms of our approach to this problem that has presented itself to us, which is not of our making, but also the fact that, as you rightly point out, our strength is actually in our membership of the European Union, the fact that we are going to deal with this collectively. So I suppose on that note, I will ask if the Minister wishes to make any concluding remarks. No?
Oh, thank you. Well, such eloquence. I'm just going to acknowledge that and to say I think that it's been really helpful to be with you, and really appreciate the questions that you have, and that the people, my officials with me, have listened carefully, and will take those forward. Even though, as I've indicated, there's not as many significant issues as there are for many other departments. At the same time, I think we're here to assure you that, to the best of our ability, we are dealing with the ones that are there, and as we await ultimately the decisions of the negotiations, and with the UK and with ourselves as part of Europe.
Well, I thank the Minister and her officials for their presentation this afternoon, and on behalf of the Joint Committee, I wish to announce that we're adjourned until Wednesday next, the 27th of February, at 9:30, when we will meet with the Chair-Designate of TUSLA, Mr. Pat Rabbitte, to discuss his appointment and strategic priorities for his term in office. Thank you very much.